I still remember the night my son introduced me as his maid. It was the night of his engagement party, held in the most expensive restaurant in the city. I had spent hours getting ready. I wore a simple navy blue dress and the pearl necklace my late husband had given me 25 years ago. I was excited. After all, Daniel was my only son. I had raised him alone after his father, Edward, died in a car accident. I had been 38 at the time. Daniel was only 13. I worked day and night to give him everything he needed. I paid for his education, supported his dreams, and helped him build his career. I never asked him for anything. I only wanted to see him happy. That evening, I entered the restaurant with a smile on my face. I looked across the room and saw Daniel standing beside his beautiful fiancée, Victoria. My heart filled with pride. I took a step toward him. "Daniel." He turned around. The moment he saw me, his smile disappeared. He quickly walked toward me. "Mom, what are you doing here?" I stared at him. "I'm your mother. I came to celebrate your engagement." He glanced nervously toward his wealthy friends. Then he lowered his voice. "Mom, you weren't supposed to come." My smile faded. "What do you mean?" He looked uncomfortable. "Please don't make a scene." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Then he whispered the words that broke my heart. "Just pretend you're staff tonight." I stared at my own son. "Are you ashamed of me?" He didn't answer. Then Victoria walked toward us. "Daniel, who is she?" My heart waited for him to say the truth. "This is my mother." But instead, Daniel looked at Victoria and said, "She works for my family." And in that moment, I realized that the son I had sacrificed my entire life for was ashamed to call me his mother. Victoria stared at me for a moment. Then she smiled politely. "Oh, I see." I wanted to disappear, but I refused to let my son see me cry. I looked at Daniel. "Is that really what you want me to do?" He avoided my eyes. "Mom, please, just stay in the background tonight." I nodded slowly. "Fine." I walked away and stood near the entrance. For the next hour, I watched my own son celebrate his engagement while pretending I was nothing more than a servant. I carried glasses. I collected empty plates. I smiled at strangers who had no idea who I really was. But then I noticed something strange. Victoria kept looking at me. She wasn't laughing. She wasn't celebrating. She looked worried. Finally, she walked toward me. "Excuse me." I turned. "Yes?" She looked around to make sure Daniel wasn't nearby. Then she quietly asked, "Are you really one of the staff?" I froze. Before I could answer, Daniel suddenly appeared behind her. "Victoria." She turned around. Daniel looked at me. His expression immediately became nervous. Victoria looked between us. "Daniel, I was just asking her something." He forced a smile. "There's nothing to ask." I looked at Victoria. For a moment, our eyes met. I could see that she knew something was wrong. Then Daniel gently took her hand and pulled her away. I watched them disappear into the crowd. That was when I realized Victoria wasn't the enemy. She was hiding something too. And whatever it was, I had a feeling it would change everything I thought I knew about my own family. The party continued, but I couldn't stop thinking about Victoria's expression. There was fear in her eyes. Not fear of me, fear of something else. I decided to find out what was happening. I walked toward the hallway behind the main dining room. As I passed a half-open door, I suddenly heard Daniel's voice. "Richard, I told you I need more time." I stopped. "Richard, Victoria's father." I stayed completely still. A deeper voice answered. "You've already had enough time, Daniel." My heart began beating faster. Daniel whispered, "Please, not tonight." Richard replied, "After the wedding, everything belongs to us." I felt my blood run cold. What did he mean? I leaned closer to the door. Then Richard said something that made my entire body freeze. "Once you marry my daughter, Anderson Holdings will be under our control." I covered my mouth. My company, my family business. The company I had spent 25 years building. They wanted to take it, and Daniel knew. I stepped away from the door before they could see me. My hands were shaking. I returned to the party and looked at my son. He was smiling, laughing, pretending everything was normal. But now I knew the truth. Or at least, I knew there was a truth he was desperately trying to hide. And I had no intention of leaving that restaurant until I discovered exactly what it was. I waited until the guests began leaving. Daniel finally came toward me. "Mom, why are you still here?" I looked at him. "I wanted to talk to you," he sighed. About what? Your father. His expression changed immediately. What about him? I studied his face. Did you ever wonder what really happened to him? Daniel looked away. Mom, Dad died 25 years ago. I know what everyone told me. What are you talking about? That it was an accident. Daniel became uncomfortable. Because it was. Then why were you talking to Richard about my company? He froze. For several seconds he said nothing. I knew then that I was right. Daniel, I whispered, what have you done? He finally looked at me. Mom, I was trying to protect you. Protect me from what? He shook his head. I can't tell you. Why? Because if I do, you'll be in danger. My heart began pounding. Who is threatening you? Daniel looked toward the restaurant entrance. Then he whispered, Richard. Before I could ask another question, Victoria suddenly appeared. Her face was pale. Daniel. He turned toward her. She looked at me. I'm sorry. I frowned. For what? Victoria took a deep breath. Then she said, Your son didn't betray you because he wanted your company. I stared at her. Then why? She looked at Daniel. Tell her. Daniel closed his eyes. And I realized, whatever he was about to tell me would change our family forever. Daniel looked at Victoria. Don't. But Victoria shook her head. She deserves to know. I stared at my son. Know what? Daniel finally looked at me. I made a mistake. What kind of mistake? I borrowed money. How much? He hesitated. $3 million. My heart sank. From Richard? Daniel nodded. Why? I made some bad investments. I lost the money. I could barely breathe. Why didn't you tell me? Because I was afraid. Afraid of me? No. He looked toward Richard's office. Afraid of what Richard would do. Victoria stepped closer. My father gave Daniel the money, but he wanted something in return. I already knew the answer. The company. She nodded. But there is something else. I looked at her. What? Victoria's eyes filled with tears. My father has been moving. The next morning, I arrived at Anderson Holdings before sunrise. I didn't sleep that night. For 25 years, I had protected my company with everything I had. Now someone was trying to steal it from me, but I wasn't going to let that happen. I called my attorney, James. James, I need you here immediately. Is everything okay, Mrs. Anderson? No. I told him everything. The money, Richard, Daniel's debt, the planned marriage, and the threat to take control of the company. There was silence on the phone. Then James said, Margaret, you need to check the financial records immediately. I agree. I'll meet you at the office. An hour later, James arrived. We went directly into my private office. I opened the company's financial system. At first, everything looked normal. Then James checked the transfer history. His face suddenly changed. What is it? He pointed at the screen. Look at this. I stared at the numbers. Millions of dollars had been transferred from company accounts. But the transfers weren't made to Richard. They had gone somewhere else. Who authorized these? James looked at me. Your son. I felt my heart sink. Daniel had lied to me. But then James noticed something strange. Wait. He opened another document. These signatures don't match. What? Daniel's signature was copied. I stared at him. Are you saying Daniel didn't authorize these transfers? James nodded slowly. That's exactly what I'm saying. I couldn't breathe. Suddenly, everything changed. Daniel wasn't the person stealing my company. Someone had been using his name. Someone had been framing my son. I immediately called him. He answered after several rings. Mom? Daniel, where are you? There was silence. Mom, I can't talk right now. Yes, you can. I spoke firmly. I know about the money. Daniel went completely silent. Then I said, Someone forged your signature. His voice trembled. What? Come to my office. Mom, Daniel. I paused. Come home. For the first time in years, I heard my son cry. Okay. And that was when I realized the person I thought I needed to fight might not be my son after all. Someone much closer to us had been controlling everything. And I was determined to find out who. Daniel arrived at my office 20 minutes later. He looked exhausted. His eyes were red and his hands were shaking. I had never seen my son look so afraid. He sat across from me. Mom, I swear I didn't steal your money. I believe you. He looked at me in surprise. You do? I nodded. Someone forged your signature. Daniel lowered his head. Then it's worse than I thought. What do you mean? He looked at Victoria. She had followed him into the office. Daniel took a deep breath. Richard didn't just want my debt. I waited. He wanted access to the company. Why? Because your company has something he desperately needs. I frowned. What? Daniel looked at me. An old account. My heart stopped. What old account? The account Dad created before he died. I stood up immediately. Your father never had an account. Daniel shook his head. That's what you were told. I stared at him. What are you saying? Victoria stepped forward. Your husband didn't die in an accident. The room went completely silent. I felt as if the floor had disappeared beneath me. Then how did he die? Daniel looked at me with tears in his eyes. Mom? I raised my hand. Tell me the truth. He finally whispered. Dad was murdered. I couldn't breathe. For 25 years, I had believed I stared at Victoria. Your father was there? She nodded through her tears. My father worked with your husband many years ago. I felt my hands begin to tremble. Then why didn't he tell me? Because he was afraid. Afraid of what? Victoria looked at Daniel. Of the people who were involved. Daniel stepped closer. Mom, Dad discovered something before he died. What? He discovered that someone inside Anderson Holdings was stealing money. I froze. Who? We don't know. But Dad must have known. Daniel nodded. He kept evidence. Where? That's what we've been trying to find. I looked at Victoria. And your father? She wiped her tears. My father helped hide the evidence. I felt anger rising inside me. Then why should I trust you? Victoria looked directly into my eyes. Because I didn't know any of this until recently. I said nothing. She continued. My father forced Daniel to marry me because he believed the evidence was connected to your family. I looked at my son. Is that true? Daniel nodded. I never wanted to lie to you. But you did. I know. You let me believe you were ashamed of me. His eyes filled with tears. I was trying to protect you. I turned away. For 25 years, I had lived with the pain of losing my husband. Now I was discovering that his death had been a lie, and my son had known more than he ever told me. Suddenly, James rushed into the office. Margaret! I turned. He looked terrified. What happened? He placed a folder on my desk. We found something. I opened it. Inside was an old photograph. I looked at it carefully. It showed my husband, Edward. Standing beside him was Richard. But there was someone else in the photograph, a man I recognized immediately. My hands began shaking. Because that man was the person I had trusted most after my husband's death, and according to the date written on the back of the photograph, the picture had been taken just one day before Edward died. I looked at the photograph again. My hands were trembling. The man standing beside Edward was my husband's business partner, Thomas. For 25 years I had trusted him. After Edward's death, Thomas had been the person who helped me manage the company. He had guided me through the hardest years of my life. He had always told me that Edward's death was a tragic accident. But now, he was standing beside my husband one day before his death. I looked at James. Where did you find this? He pointed to the folder. It was hidden inside an old company file. Who found it? One of our accountants. I looked at Daniel. Did you know about this? He shook his head. No. Victoria suddenly stepped closer. There's something else. I looked at her. What? She pulled a small envelope from her purse. My father gave me this. I opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter. I recognized the handwriting immediately. Edward's. My husband had written the letter shortly before his death. I began reading. Margaret, if you're reading this, then something has happened to me. My heart stopped. I could barely continue. Do not trust Thomas. I looked up at James. Then I continued reading. Everything you believe about my business is a lie. The money is not gone. I hid it where no one will ever think to look. My eyes filled with tears. Then I reached the final sentence. Protect our son. He is the only person I know I can trust. I slowly lowered the letter. Daniel was staring at me. Mom? I looked at my son. For the first time that night, I understood something. My husband had known he was in danger. He had known someone wanted him dead. And he had tried to protect us. But there was one question that terrified me more than anything. If Thomas had been involved in my husband's death, Why was he still working for me after 25 years? I suddenly heard footsteps outside my office. Everyone became silent. The door handle began to move. Someone was trying to enter. James quickly locked the door. Then a voice came from the other side. It was Thomas. "Margaret?" I looked at Daniel. Thomas continued. "Open the door." I held Edward's letter tightly in my hand. For 25 years I had trusted that man. But now, I knew the truth. And he didn't know that I knew. I whispered, "Don't let him in." Then Thomas said something that made my blood run cold. "I know you found the letter." I looked at Daniel. "How does he know?" Daniel shook his head. "I don't know." Thomas knocked again. Margaret opened the door. I held Edward's letter tightly. James whispered, "Don't say anything." Thomas waited. Then his voice became colder. "You have no idea what you're dealing with." I stepped closer to the door. "Then tell me." There was silence. Thomas finally said, "Edward wasn't the innocent man you think he was." My heart stopped. "You're lying." "Am I?" I looked at Daniel. Thomas continued, "Your husband betrayed the wrong people." I opened the door. James immediately tried to stop me, but I raised my hand. Thomas stood outside. He looked completely calm. Too calm. I stared at him. "You knew about the letter?" He smiled. "I knew Edward left something behind." "Did you kill him?" His smile disappeared. "Be careful, Margaret." "Answer me!" Thomas stepped closer. "You've spent 25 years believing you knew your husband." I felt tears in my eyes. "Did you kill him?" Thomas said nothing. Then suddenly Victoria screamed, "Daniel!" We all turned. Daniel had collapsed. He was lying on the floor. His face was pale. I rushed toward him. "Daniel!" He wasn't responding. James called for help. Victoria knelt beside him. Then I noticed something. A small envelope was lying beside Daniel. I picked it up. There was no name on it. Only one sentence written across the front. "The truth is under your home." I looked at Thomas. He was gone. I immediately understood. Whatever Edward had hidden, whatever secret had caused his death, the answer was waiting for me at home. And for the first time in 25 years, I was finally ready to uncover it. We rushed Daniel to the hospital. The doctors told us he had been drugged. My heart broke when I heard those words. Someone had tried to silence my son. But who? I stood beside his hospital bed holding his hand. Daniel slowly opened his eyes. "Mom, I'm here." He looked terrified. "Don't go home." I froze. "Why?" "Because they're watching you." "Who?" Daniel struggled to speak. "Thomas." I looked at Victoria. She was standing silently near the window. Daniel continued, "Mom, the letter. What about it?" "There's something Edward hid beneath the house." I remembered the message. "The truth is under your home." I suddenly understood. My old family house. The house where Daniel had grown up. The house where Edward and I had lived before his death. I hadn't returned there in years. That night I went back. James and Victoria came with me. The house was completely dark. I unlocked the front door. Everything looked exactly as I remembered. The old staircase. The family photographs. Edward's study. I walked into the room where my husband had spent most of his time. I looked around. Where would he hide something? James searched the bookshelves. Victoria checked the desk. I suddenly remembered something. Edward always kept one particular painting above his desk. I moved it. Behind it was a small metal box. My hands began shaking. I opened it. Inside was a key, and beneath the key was another letter. This one had my name on it. Margaret. I opened it. The first sentence made my heart stop. "If you have found this, then Thomas has already betrayed us." I looked at James. Then I continued reading. Everything began with a secret account. My hands trembled. The money was never stolen. I moved it myself to protect our family. I stared at the letter. Then I reached the final line. "The key will lead you to the truth." I looked down at the key in my hand. There was a number engraved on it. 217. James suddenly spoke. "Margaret." I looked at him. He pointed toward the basement door. There was a small metal lock, and engraved above it were the numbers 217. I slowly inserted the key. The lock clicked. The door opened, and what I saw inside changed everything. Inside the basement was a small room. I stepped inside slowly. The air was cold. There was an old wooden table in the center. On it sat several boxes. James opened the first one. Inside were financial documents, bank statements, contracts, photographs, and a list of names. I looked at the papers. Then I saw something that made my heart stop. Thomas's name was everywhere, but there were other names too. People who had worked with my husband 25 years ago. People who were no longer alive. I picked up another document. It was a bank statement. The account belonged to Anderson Holdings, but the money had been transferred to a secret account. The account holder was Edward Anderson, my husband. I looked at James. Edward was hiding money. James shook his head, not hiding it for himself. I read the documents again. Suddenly, Victoria spoke. Look at this. She held up a photograph. It showed Edward standing beside another man. I recognized him immediately. It was Richard, Victoria's father. I looked at her. Your father knew my husband. She nodded. They were partners. Then why did Richard pretend he barely knew him? Victoria lowered her eyes. Because my father was involved. My heart sank. Involved in what? She took a deep breath. The money. I stared at her. What money? The money Edward moved. James quickly checked the documents. Then he found something. Margaret, this account is still active. I froze. What? Someone has been accessing it. When? He looked at the date. Last week. My blood ran cold. Who? James turned the document toward me. The name was clearly written. Thomas Anderson. I couldn't breathe. Thomas had been using my husband's secret account for 25 years. But there was something even more frightening. The latest withdrawal had been made. Yesterday, the same night as Daniel's engagement party, someone was still following Edward's plan. And whoever it was had just made a terrible mistake. I looked at the document again. Thomas Anderson? James nodded. Yes. My mind was racing. Thomas had been stealing from my family for 25 years. But why? And why had Edward allowed the secret account to remain open? I suddenly remembered the letter. The money is not gone. I hid it where no one will ever think to look. I looked at James. Maybe the money wasn't in the account? He frowned. What do you mean? I pointed at the bank statement. The account was only a distraction. Victoria stepped closer. Then where is the money? I looked around the basement. There were boxes everywhere. Old documents. Photographs. Everything Edward had hidden. Then I noticed something. One of the wooden boxes had a strange symbol carved into its lid. It was the same symbol I remembered from my husband's old office. I opened it. Inside was a small black notebook. I picked it up. The first page contained only one sentence. Trust no one. I turned the page. There were dates, names, payments, and beside each name was a number. James looked over my shoulder. These are records. Of what? Bribes. My heart stopped. I looked at the names. Some belonged to politicians. Others belonged to businessmen. Then I saw one name that made my blood run cold. Richard. Victoria saw it too. She stepped backward. No. I looked at her. Your father. She shook her head. My father told me he had nothing to do with Edward's death. I turned another page. There was a final note. Richard knows where the evidence is. Suddenly we heard a noise upstairs. Someone had entered the house. James quickly turned off the basement light. We stood in complete darkness. Footsteps moved slowly across the floor above us. Then I heard a man's voice. Margaret? It was Thomas. I held my breath. Thomas had followed us. And this time, he wasn't here to talk. I grabbed Victoria's hand. Stay quiet. We stood behind the basement door listening. The footsteps came closer. Then they stopped. Thomas was standing directly above us. Margaret, I know you're here. I looked at James. He slowly shook his head. Thomas continued. You found the notebook, didn't you? My heart began pounding. How did he know? Then I remembered the photograph. The letter. The secret account. Everything suddenly made sense. Thomas had been watching us for years. He knew about Edward's secrets. He knew about the account. And now he knew we had found the evidence. I quietly whispered to James. Is there another way out? He pointed toward the back wall. There was a narrow door. We moved toward it silently. But before we could reach it, we heard the basement door opening. Thomas was coming down. I quickly hid the notebook inside my dress. Victoria stepped behind a box. James stood beside me. Thomas entered the room. He looked around. Then his eyes stopped on me. Margaret. I stared at him. Thomas. He smiled. You should have left this alone. I felt anger rising inside me. You knew my husband was murdered. His smile disappeared. I didn't kill Edward. Then who did? Thomas stepped closer. You really want to know? Yes. He looked at Victoria. Then he said, Ask her father. Victoria froze. My father? Thomas nodded. Richard knows exactly what happened that night. I stared at him. Why did Richard want my company? Thomas laughed bitterly. Because your husband hid something from him. What? Thomas looked directly into my eyes. The original evidence. Before I could ask another question, the light suddenly went out. The basement became completely dark. I heard Victoria scream. Then I heard a loud crash. Someone grabbed my arm. I tried to pull away. And then I heard a voice whisper in my ear, Run! It was Daniel. He had come back, and he had brought someone with him, someone I never expected to see again. I turned around. Standing behind Daniel was a man I hadn't seen in 25 years. My heart stopped. Edward? The man stepped into the light. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. He looked older. His hair was gray. His face had changed. But those eyes, I knew those eyes. It was my husband. The man I had buried 25 years ago. The man I had mourned every single day. The man I believed was dead. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. Edward looked at me. Margaret. My knees almost gave way. Daniel grabbed my arm. Mom, please. I stared at Edward. You're alive? He slowly nodded. Tears filled my eyes. Why? Edward looked at me with sadness. Because if I had come back then, you and Daniel would have been killed. I shook my head. No, it's the truth. I looked at Thomas. He had gone completely pale. Edward turned toward him. You failed. Thomas stepped backward. You were supposed to be dead. Edward's expression became cold. I wanted everyone to believe that. I looked between them. Someone please tell me what is happening. Edward finally looked at me. 25 years ago, I discovered that Thomas and Richard were stealing from the company. My heart sank. I confronted them. He continued. They tried to kill me. I covered my mouth. I survived the crash. Then why didn't you come home? Because I learned they were watching you. Edward's voice broke. If I returned, they would have killed you and Daniel. I looked at my son. Daniel was crying. Then why did you let us believe you were dead? Edward lowered his eyes. Because it was the only way to keep you alive. I wanted to be angry. I wanted to scream. But all I could do was stare at the man I had spent 25 years grieving. Then Edward said something that changed everything. Margaret, there is one more thing you need to know. I whispered. What? He looked toward Victoria. Richard isn't the real mastermind. The room went silent. Edward looked directly at me. The person who ordered my death is someone you have trusted for 25 years. And then his eyes moved toward Daniel. I looked at Daniel. My son was standing completely still. Daniel? I whispered. Edward nodded. Yes. I felt my heart breaking all over again. What does my son have to do with this? Daniel immediately stepped forward. Mom, it's not what you think. Edward looked at him. Tell her. Daniel shook his head. I can't. I turned toward my son. Tell me what? Daniel's eyes filled with tears. I knew Dad was alive. I felt the room spinning. You knew? He nodded. For how long? 3 years. I stepped backward. 3 years? Daniel tried to come closer, but I raised my hand. Don't. Mom, please listen. You knew your father was alive, and you let me believe he was dead. I was trying to protect you. Everyone keeps saying that. My voice echoed through the basement. Everyone is protecting me by lying to me. Daniel began to cry. I was afraid. Of what? He looked at Edward. Of the truth. Edward stepped forward. Daniel didn't know everything. I looked at my husband. Then what does he know? Edward took a deep breath. 3 years ago, Daniel discovered that someone was still searching for the evidence I hid. I looked at my son. And you found it? Daniel nodded. But before I could tell Mom, someone threatened me. Who? Daniel looked at Victoria. Her father. Victoria immediately shook her head. No. Daniel continued. Richard told me that if I ever revealed the truth, Mom would die. I looked at Victoria. Did you know about this? She was crying. No, I swear I didn't. Then Edward suddenly said, Richard was only following orders. I turned toward him. Whose orders? Edward looked at me. The person who ordered my death 25 years ago. He paused. I was Thomas. I stared at him. But Thomas was no longer in the room. He had disappeared. Then I heard the sound of a car starting outside. James ran toward the stairs. He's escaping! I looked at Daniel. Then we need to stop him. Because after 25 years, the man responsible for destroying my family was finally running out of places to hide. We ran upstairs as quickly as we could. By the time we reached the front door, Thomas's car was already disappearing down the street. James ran outside. He's getting away. Edward stopped him. Don't chase him. James turned around. Why not? Edward looked at me. Because Thomas has nowhere left to hide. I stared at my husband. What does that mean? Edward walked toward the old table in the hallway. He picked up a small photograph. Thomas didn't leave because he was afraid of us. Then why? Because he knows the evidence is gone. I looked at the notebook hidden in my hand. The notebook? Edward nodded. That notebook contains only half the truth. My heart sank. Where is the other half? Edward looked toward Daniel. Your son has it. I turned to Daniel. What? Daniel slowly reached into his jacket. He pulled out a small USB drive. I found this 3 years ago. I stared at him. Why didn't you tell me? Because I was scared. Edward took the drive. This contains everything. James immediately called the police. But before we could do anything else, Daniel's phone rang. He looked at the screen. It was an unknown number. He answered. A man's voice whispered, You should never have found your father. Daniel froze. I grabbed his hand. Who is this? The voice laughed. Then it said, Ask Edward what happened to the night of the accident. The call ended. I looked at my husband. Edward? His face had gone pale. What aren't you telling me? He looked at me. And for the first time since I had seen him again, he looked truly afraid. Then he whispered, The accident wasn't the beginning. I stared at him. What do you mean? Edward took a deep breath. It was the second attempt. My heart stopped. Second attempt? He nodded. The first attempt happened 3 days before the crash. And who was behind it? Edward looked toward the front door. Someone from inside our own family. And suddenly I realized. The truth about my husband's death was even darker than I had imagined. Edward looked at me. The first attempt was made by someone I trusted completely. Who? He hesitated. Your brother. I froze. My brother died 10 years ago. Edward nodded. I know. Then how could he have tried to kill you? He didn't. I stared at him. Edward continued. Someone used his name. I felt confused. Why? Because your brother had access to our company records. James suddenly spoke. Then someone wanted us to believe he was responsible. Edward nodded. Exactly. I looked at Daniel. Who could have done that? Before anyone could answer, the lights in the house suddenly went out. Victoria screamed. A loud crash came from upstairs. Edward immediately grabbed my hand. Stay with me. We moved toward the stairs. Then we heard footsteps. Someone was running through the hallway. Daniel rushed after them. Stop! A door slammed. James followed. Seconds later, Daniel returned holding a small black bag. He left this behind. Edward opened it. Inside was a phone, a photograph, and a key. I picked up the photograph. My heart stopped. It showed me, standing outside Anderson Holdings. The picture had been taken only 2 days earlier. Someone had been watching me. I turned the photograph over. There was a message written on the back. The truth will cost you your son. I looked at Daniel. He immediately took my hand. Mom, I'm not going anywhere. But Edward looked worried. That's what they want you to believe. Suddenly, the phone inside the bag began ringing. Everyone froze. Edward slowly picked it up. He answered. No one spoke. Then a voice came through. Edward. My husband went completely still. The voice continued. You should have stayed dead. Edward looked at me. Then the caller said something that made my blood run cold. Because now your wife will finally learn what you did to her. The call ended. I stared at Edward. What did you do? He said nothing. I stepped closer. Edward, what did you do 25 years ago? My husband looked at me with tears in his eyes. Then he whispered, I betrayed the person who trusted me most. And suddenly, I realized the biggest secret of all had not yet been revealed. I stared at Edward. What did you do? He lowered his head. 25 years ago, I made a deal. What kind of deal? To save you and Daniel. My heart was pounding. With whom? Edward looked at me. Thomas. I couldn't believe it. You made a deal with the man who tried to kill you? Edward nodded. After the first attempt on my life, I realized I couldn't protect you alone. So you disappeared? Yes. Then why did Thomas think you were dead? Because I made him believe I had died in the crash. I shook my head. But you survived. Yes. Then what did you promise him? Edward took a deep breath. I promised to disappear forever. My eyes filled with tears. In exchange for what? Your life. I stared at him. Edward continued. Thomas promised that if I disappeared, he would leave you and Daniel alone. But he didn't. No. Edward looked at the floor. He kept searching for the evidence. I suddenly understood. The evidence that could expose him? Edward nodded. And the secret account. Yes. Where is the money? Edward looked at me. Safe. Where? He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small key. The money belongs to you. I stared at the key. What does this open? Edward looked at Daniel. Then at Victoria. Finally, he looked at me. The vault. My heart stopped. What vault? The one I created before I disappeared. Where is it? Edward stepped closer. Inside Anderson Holdings. I couldn't speak. Then suddenly the front door opened. Everyone turned. A police officer entered. Behind him stood Thomas. He was handcuffed. I stared at him in shock. Thomas looked directly at Edward. You think this is over? Edward didn't answer. Thomas smiled. You're wrong. The police officer pulled him away. But before he left, Thomas looked at me. Ask your husband who he really betrayed. The door closed. I turned toward Edward. Who did you betray? Edward's face became pale. Then he whispered, Your father. And suddenly, the truth about my family became even more complicated than I could have imagined. I stared at Edward. My father? Edward nodded slowly. Your father knew about the money. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My father died before you. I know. Then how could you betray him? Edward looked at me with tears in his eyes. Because he trusted me with a secret. What secret? Edward took a deep breath. Your father discovered that Thomas and Richard were planning to steal everything from our company. I looked at Victoria. Her face had gone completely pale. My father? Edward nodded. Richard was involved from the beginning. Victoria shook her head. No, my father would never. He did. Edward's voice was firm. Richard helped Thomas move the money. I looked at Edward. Then why did you say you betrayed my father? Edward looked away. Because I promised him I would protect his family. Which family? Yours. My heart began racing. Edward continued. Your father knew they were going to kill him. Before he died, he gave me the evidence, I whispered. And you hid it? Yes. Where? Edward looked toward Daniel. Your son knows. I turned to Daniel. He slowly nodded. The evidence is inside the vault. I stared at him. Then why haven't we opened it? Daniel looked terrified. Because we don't have the final key. I looked at Edward. He reached into his pocket. Then he placed a small silver key in my hand. I stared at it. Where did you get this? Edward smiled sadly. Your father gave it to me 25 years ago. I closed my fingers around the key, and suddenly I realized. The truth about my family had been waiting for me all along. I held the silver key tightly in my hand. For 25 years, I had believed my father had died without leaving me anything. Now I was discovering that he had left behind a secret, powerful enough to destroy everyone who had betrayed our family. Where is the vault? I asked. Daniel looked at Edward. My husband nodded. Inside the old headquarters. I immediately understood. Under my office. Edward nodded. The vault was built before the company became successful. James looked shocked. Why didn't I know about this? Because only 3 people knew it existed, Edward replied. Who? Myself, Margaret's father, and Thomas. I felt a chill. Thomas knew? Yes. Then why didn't he open it? Edward looked at me. Because he never had the key. I looked down at the silver key. Suddenly my phone rang. I looked at the screen. It was the police, I answered. Mrs. Anderson, you need to come to the station. Why? There was a pause. We found something in Thomas's car. What? The officer's voice became serious. A recording. My heart began racing. What kind of recording? It's a conversation between Thomas and Richard. I looked at Victoria. Is my father's name mentioned? Another pause. Yes. I closed my eyes. What did they say? The officer replied, They were discussing your husband's death. I felt my entire body go cold. Send me the recording. We can't do that. Then I'll come to the station. I ended the call. Edward immediately stood up. I'll go with you. I looked at him. No. He looked surprised. This is my fight. I turned toward Daniel. You and Victoria stay here. Daniel nodded. I placed the silver key in my pocket. Then I looked at Edward. After 25 years, I'm finally going to learn the truth. And this time, no one was going to stop me. I arrived at the police station with Edward beside me. The detective was waiting in a small room. He placed a laptop on the table. We recovered this recording from Thomas's car. I sat down. The detective pressed play. At first I heard Thomas's voice. Then Richard's. My hands began to shake. Thomas said, Edward knows too much. Richard replied, Then make sure he never speaks. I covered my mouth. The recording continued. Thomas said, What about Margaret? Richard laughed. She doesn't know anything. My heart broke. They had planned everything. My husband's death. The lies. The stolen money. Even my son's engagement. Then I heard something that made me freeze. Richard said, Once Daniel marries Victoria, we'll have access to everything. The recording suddenly ended. I looked at the detective. Is that all? He nodded. But we found something else. He placed a photograph on the table. It showed Richard meeting someone. I stared at the person beside him. I couldn't believe my eyes. It was someone I knew. Someone I had trusted for years. Someone who had been helping me run Anderson Holdings. I looked at Edward. He immediately understood. That's impossible, I whispered. No. The detective looked at me. Do you recognize him? I nodded slowly. Yes. My voice trembled. That's James, my own attorney, the man I had trusted with every secret, the man who had been helping me investigate Thomas, the man who had been sitting beside me all along. Suddenly everything became clear. James hadn't been helping me find the truth. He had been making sure I never found it. And now, I knew exactly who I needed to confront. I returned to the office with Edward. I didn't tell James that I knew the truth. I wanted to see how far his betrayal went. When I entered my office, James was already waiting. Margaret, what happened? I looked at him calmly. Nothing. He smiled. Did the police find anything? I watched his face carefully. Yes. His smile disappeared for half a second. Then he asked, What did they find? A recording. James became nervous. What recording? I walked closer. A conversation between Thomas and Richard. He swallowed. What did they say? I smiled. They talked about Edward. James looked at my husband. For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. Then I said, They also mentioned you. James froze. Edward stepped forward. James. My attorney slowly backed away. I can explain. I shook my head. Then explain. He looked at me. I never wanted anyone to get hurt. Then why were you working with Richard? I had no choice. Everyone says that. I stepped closer. You helped them steal from my company. No. You helped them hide the truth about my husband. James shook his head. You don't understand. Then make me understand. He suddenly looked toward the door. Then he whispered, Richard isn't the person you should be afraid of. I stared at him. Who then? James looked at Edward. The person behind everything is much closer than you think. Before I could ask another question, James pulled out his phone. He showed me a photograph. My heart stopped. It was a picture of Daniel, taken only hours earlier. Someone had been following my son. Then James whispered, They have Daniel. I immediately called my son. He didn't answer. I called again. Nothing. I looked at Edward. His face had gone pale. Then my phone received a message. There was only one sentence. "Come alone, Margaret." And beneath it was an address. I knew that address. It was the place where Edward had supposedly died 25 years ago. I couldn't wait another second. I turned to Edward. "Stay here." He immediately shook his head. "Margaret, you're not going alone." "I have to." James suddenly stepped forward. "She's right." I looked at him. He continued, "If they believe you're alone, they'll reveal themselves." Edward looked furious. "No." I turned toward my husband. "Edward, I've spent 25 years living with your death." I took a deep breath. "Tonight, I'm not running from the truth." I left the office. The address led me to an abandoned warehouse outside the city. My heart was pounding as I stepped inside. "Daniel?" There was no answer. Then I heard footsteps. A light suddenly turned on. Daniel was sitting in a chair. His hands were tied. "Mom!" I rushed toward him. But a man stepped out of the darkness. I stopped. It wasn't Thomas. It wasn't Richard. It was someone I never expected. My own brother's closest friend. He looked at me and smiled. "Hello, Margaret." I stared at him. "You?" He laughed. "You finally found us." "Where is my son?" "Right in front of you." "Let him go." He shook his head. "Not until you give us the key." My hand moved toward my pocket. The silver key. The key to Edward's vault. I suddenly understood. They didn't want Daniel. They wanted what was inside that vault. I looked at my son. Then I looked at the man standing before me. "You've been behind everything." He smiled. "No, Margaret." He stepped closer. "I've only been cleaning up the mess your family created." Then Daniel suddenly shouted, "Mom, don't give him the key." The man immediately turned toward him. And in that moment, I knew I had to make a choice. Save my son, or finally uncover the truth. I looked at Daniel. Then I looked at the man standing in front of me. "The key," he repeated. I slowly pulled it from my pocket. "Let my son go first." He laughed. "You still don't understand." He stepped closer. "You are not in control here." I looked around the warehouse. Then I noticed something. A small red light was blinking above the door. A camera. Someone was watching us. I smiled. "You're right." He looked confused. "Then give me the key." I held it up. "But first tell me who sent you." His expression changed. "Why?" "Because I want to know who destroyed my family." He stared at me. Then he finally said, "Thomas." I wasn't surprised, but then he continued. "Thomas was working for someone else." My heart stopped. "Who?" The man smiled. "Your father." I froze. "My father is dead." "Yes." "Then who?" He leaned closer. The man who ordered Edward's death wasn't Thomas. I felt the blood drain from my face. Then who was it? Suddenly, the warehouse doors opened. Police officers rushed inside. The man immediately tried to run. But he was arrested. Daniel was freed. I rushed toward my son and hugged him tightly. "Mom, you came?" "I will always come for you." Then I looked toward the entrance. Edward was standing there. Beside him was the detective. The detective held up a file. "We found the person who ordered the attack 25 years ago." I looked at Edward. He nodded slowly. The detective opened the file. And when I saw the name, my entire world stopped, because the person responsible was someone I had loved more than anyone else. I stared at the name on the file. My heart stopped. It was my own brother, but that was impossible. He had died 10 years ago. The detective looked at me. "Your brother was the one who ordered the attack on Edward." I couldn't speak. Edward slowly stepped toward me. "Margaret, your brother was involved with Thomas and Richard from the beginning." Tears filled my eyes. "Why?" Edward answered. "Because he wanted control of the company." I looked at Daniel. Suddenly everything made sense. The lies, the stolen money, the engagement, the threats. Everything had been part of one plan. But there was still one question. "Why did you pretend to be ashamed of me, Daniel?" My son looked down. "Because Richard was watching me." He took my hand. "I knew that if he believed I didn't care about you, he would stop watching us." I began to cry. Daniel hugged me. "I'm sorry, Mom." I held my son tightly. For the first time in years, I felt like I had my little boy back. Then I turned toward Edward. "You should have come home." He looked at me with tears in his eyes. I was afraid. "Of what?" Of losing you. I stepped closer. You already lost 25 years with me. Edward lowered his head. I touched his face. I don't know if I can forgive you. I understand, but I can try. He looked at me, and for the first time in 25 years, I smiled at my husband. The truth was finally out. Thomas and Richard were arrested. The stolen money was recovered, and Anderson Holdings remained in my hands. But I learned something far more valuable than money. Family isn't about never making mistakes. It's about finding the courage to tell the truth, even when the truth hurts. That night, I had entered a restaurant believing my own son was ashamed of me. I left that night believing I had lost my family forever, but I was wrong. Sometimes, the people we love hide the truth because they are afraid of losing us. And sometimes, the greatest betrayal is not the lie itself. It's the years we lose because no one was brave enough to tell the truth. I spent 25 years mourning a dead husband. I spent years believing my son didn't value me. But in the end, I discovered that my family had been fighting to protect me all along. And that night, I finally understood something. No matter how dark the truth becomes, a family that chooses honesty can always find its way home.